4 words. That's all it took to shatter Adonalsium, the singular god that created the Cosmere as you know it. Let's take a look at the Dawnshards, what they are, where they've ended up, and the theory that might explain the two that we've not yet seen. Welcome to Second Breakfast. My name's Lee. Join me as we explore the lore, theories, and biggest questions of the Cosmere, because if I have the questions, maybe you do too. If that sounds like your cup of tea, consider subscribing and joining us for future journeys into the Cosmere. Before there was a Cosmere as we know it, there was one being, Adonalsium, a single unified god who held all of the power that would later be divided among 16 shards. Everything that exists in the Cosmere, every world, every bit of investiture was made using 4 specific commands. Think of them as the underlying instructions that underpin reality. 4 words that built the Cosmere out of nothing. The form those commands manifest in-world are the Dawnshards, but those 4 same Dawnshards that built everything were also the same objects used to shatter Adonalsium. 10,000 years ago, a group of conspirators turned the tools of creation into the tools of deicide. That event is called the Shattering, and it is, without exaggeration, the single event that the rest of the Cosmere can track its origins back towards. Adonalsium was shattered into 16 fragments. 16 shards. Odium, ruin, autonomy, cultivation, preservation, honour, and all the others. Each one taken up by a conspirator who at their point of ascension stopped being people in the way that we understand them and instead became something closer to a personality wearing a god's intent. Years ago, a fan at a Words of Radiance release party in 2014 asked Brandon Sanderson to tease something, anything about the Dawnshards. His answer was one sentence. One Dawnshard is different from all the rest. No explanation, just a seed planted into the ground, 6 years before we got a novella to make any sense of it. But keep that in mind, one Dawnshard is not like the others, as we still do not know all of the Dawnshard commands yet, and it may be the key to understanding them fully. There's also a mural, hidden for millennia in an underwater cavern beneath the island of Amia, that depicts the shattering itself. It shows the sun exploding into 4 pieces, and then each of those 4 pieces exploding again into 4 more. 4, then 16. 4 Dawnshards and 16 shards. Hold on to that imagery. We'll be coming back to both of these. So where are they now? So, 4 Dawnshards, and we know the names of 2. Change and exist. Notice something already. Neither of the 2 Dawnshards we actually know is out in the open. Both are being hidden, on purpose, by the people who have them. Let's start with change. In the Dawnshard novella, a Thaylen woman named Risen leads an expedition to Amia to save her Larkin, Chiri-Chiri, and inadvertently finds the mural we referenced earlier, the one with the exploding sun, 4 and 16. The island itself was protected by the Sleepless, who did not want the Dawnshard to fall into the wrong hands, and so they caused problems for Risen from the very beginning. But by Brandon's own account, they only kept a couple of Hordlings on watch, because in a million years they never imagined a human could simply absorb the Dawnshard within the mural. When Risen takes up the Dawnshard, she hears the command, change. And so, the Dawnshard transfers itself directly into her. She became the Dawnshard, with change presumably one of those 4 primal commands of creation. She's not wielding it like a weapon, she's not even really in control of it. And Brandon's actually said this directly. Risen is currently flatly incapable of using the Dawnshard. Here's why. A Dawnshard is a command rather than a fuel source. To do anything meaningful with it, its bearer appears to need some existing way to access and direct investiture, such as a Nahel bond or another invested art. This is explicitly why the Sleepless have forbidden Risen from bonding a Spren in that Dawnshard novella. She just has no way of utilising the Dawnshard she holds, and is effectively a loaded gun without a trigger. And she's now watched over by the Sleepless, the hive mind creatures who took over guarding Amia after its original protectors, the Larkin together with the Lancerin, were nearly wiped out. She's also protected by her Larkin companion, Chiri-Chiri, a descendant of those original Larkin Guardians. However, the Lancerin are believed to be extinct following the Scarring of Amia, an event Hethia attributes to the unmade Dei Ganathis. The Sleepless, who now remain with Risen, are likely to be equally protecting the Dawnshard, as well as keeping tabs on Risen to ensure that she doesn't bond a Spren. And as of Wind and Truth, she still has the Dawnshard, still in hiding and still protected by the Sleepless. Now, moving on to Exist. This one seemingly belongs to Hoyd. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know who Hoyd is. He's held a Dawnshard for most of the Cosmere's history. Hoyd did give up the Dawnshard at one point, but Wind and Truth reveals that's not where the story ends. By the time the Stormlight Archive begins, he is carrying it once again. This revelation comes when Risen senses that Hoid is still one of the 4 Dawnshard bearers, leaving Nickley stunned. Realising what just happened, Nickley concludes that Hoid relinquished the Dawnshard centuries ago before quietly taking it up again, allowing everyone to mistake the signs for lingering after effects. And Hoid doesn't deny the conclusion. Instead, he simply remarks that it's a secret he had worked very hard to keep. Even the Sleepless, whose purpose is to guard the Dawnshards, had been deceived. Let's consider what the Dawnshard did to Hoid. He appears ageless, he heals from almost any injury, and there's a side effect his own apprentice eventually named the Torment, though Hoid wouldn't share that description. Hoid is physically involuntarily incapable of intentionally harming another living being. He did kindly make an exception for Kelsier, by virtue of his status as a cognitive shadow. But anyway, try to picture what that means for every decision he's made across every book in which he's appeared. As just mentioned, late in Wind and Truth he crosses paths with Risen, the holder of the changed Dawnshard, neither expecting the other to have a Dawnshard. Their 2 Dawnshards violently react to each other, pulling the 2 of them physically towards each other. Hoid stops on the basis that he is not ready for whatever he is planning. See my other video on this. And so Hoid flees, vowing for the 2 of them never to meet again. And with Retribution freshly formed at the end of the same book, Hoid, fearing what a newly unified god of honour and odium might do to get his hands on that Dawnshard, hands it to his apprentice Sigzil for safekeeping. Hoid's body on Rashar is destroyed in that aftermath. Ray Should Be Brave suggests that Hoid's transfer of the Dawnshard to Sigzil was a trick that he pulled before with his friend Frost, and is that very reason Frost is angry with Hoid, as seen in those letters we read in the epigraphs of The Way of Kings. Sanderson himself has alluded to the additional circumstances to Frost's immortality, reinforcing this idea. I quite like this theory, as Hoid's decision to transfer the Dawnshard was made in urgency, for fear of Odium's impending attack. It would figure that with the small time Hoid had available, he would revert to a method that he had previously utilised. That's the beginning of Sigzil becoming Nomad. The Sunlit Man was published before Wind and Truth. Chronologically, The Sunlit Man happens after Wind and Truth. Brandon wrote and released the sequel to an event before he had even published the event itself. And by the events of the future in The Sunlit Man, Sigzil is similarly afflicted by this torment, and according to Brandon directly, it's worse for him than it ever was for Hoid. He stopped aging, and he's developed a further torment that we have not yet seen. The ability to skip, to teleport between seemingly random planets, but showing a preference towards sources of investiture. And he's hunted the entire time by an organisation called the Night Brigade, who are hunting Nomad and his Dawnshard. But by the time of The Sunlit Man, Sigzil no longer possesses the Dawnshard. Many readers infer that he returned it to Hoid, particularly because Sigzil believes that the Night Brigade could use his connection to find Hoid, but the novel never actually confirms that Hoid became its new bearer. It could be suggested that this implication simply leads back to Hoid because he also previously held it, rather than being his current holder. The Coppermine has been deliberately ambiguous about where this ends up, recognising the ambiguity left in the text, and Brandon's own comments similarly lightly suggest that it is not with Hoid. Having just gone back and listened to the Sunlit Man and Wind and Truth reaction podcast, the folks over at the 17th Shard podcast seem to share my frustration. The timeline of this Dawnshard is slightly unclear. As for where I stand, it appears that it is written deliberately to suggest that it's with Hoid, and that's where people seem to be hedging their bets. But I absolutely would not be surprised if this was elsewhere, and I actually personally think that that is slightly more likely. Why else introduce this ambiguity? But to reiterate, the community as a whole does seemingly believe that this is back with Hoid. Just keep it in mind that it might not be. One more thing before we move on, because it's too good not to mention. Brandon's confirmed that someone else, not Hoid or Sigzil, has already appeared on the page, somewhere in his published work, living under a torment, and nobody's identified them yet. This isn't a theory, that's an answer directly given by Brandon himself. I personally believe that this quote from Brandon Sanderson would again reinforce Ray Should Be Brave's theory on this potentially being Frost, though Brandon did say we wouldn't be able to notice it yet. Perhaps he's banking on us associating Frost's immortality to his nature as a dragon, but it's important to note that we do know Sanderson has separately explained that something else is going on with Frost. Maybe it's the Dawnshard. So, 2 down, 2 to go. There's far less detail here. And we finally do have clues about a third Dawnshard in the Isles of the Emberdark, where we learn that the dragons of the Cosmere originally held one of these primal commands. But they realised that too many of their own kind knew exactly where it was. To protect the Cosmere, the dragons moved it in secret, leaving their ancient vaults empty. And the 4th Dawnshard, we know nothing. No holder, no location, and not the command it represents. So we have 2 known Dawnshards being actively protected by the people who hold them, 1 missing, and 1 completely blank. So now let's look at what they actually do. So what does holding a Dawnshard actually do to you? As mentioned, a Dawnshard on its own is basically dead weight. It is an enormous pool of investiture, but it needs a person with access to investiture and intent behind them to utilise the power. Which is why Risen, without a sprint or a Nahel bond, is currently sitting on one of the most dangerous objects in the Cosmere, but an inability to use it. Every Dawnshard, regardless of which command it represents, grants the same baseline effects. Think back to the effects of breath and the heightenings in Warbreaker. A Dawnshard will provide better perception of colour and sound. Additionally, it provides the ability to sense the souls of every living thing around you. These powers are conferred due to the volume of investiture rather than the Dawnshard's power themselves, a fact reinforced by Sanderson himself. And then there's the cost of holding a Dawnshard. Holding a Dawnshard changes you, and that change begins quickly. Sanderson has been completely direct about this. Holding a Dawnshard warps your soul, and you cannot hold one, even briefly, without it leaving a permanent mark and altering an individual's spirit web. A name for someone's soul in the Cosmere. They also increasingly force the holder to act in line with the Dawnshard's intent, much like the Shards of Adonalsium themselves. There's actually a proper Cosmere comparison for this. Savants from Mistborn. People who lean on one specific investor ability so heavily that it starts reshaping them physically and mentally. Think of Spook from Mistborn. The same principle here. The sheer volume of investiture held for an increasingly long period of time, having an increasing effect on its holder. Think of the implications for Hoyd, who has held a Dawnshard for such an extensive period of time. Hoyd's torments aren't necessarily inherently negative, it's just what happens to a savant of holding the Dawnshard's commands for such a significant period of time. Long-term viewers already know where this channel is going next, because we've been here before. In the Town video, we covered another theory that one of the two unknown Dawnshards carries the command Bind, and that it's the actual weapon that destroyed Ashen, Town's grandmother's world, and that Town's soul was warped by the Dawnshard in an attempt to assassinate Cultivation. Perhaps another Torment, and that this theory may be the real reason that he held the Oath Pact alone for 4,500 years while the other heralds eventually broke. Though you will also know that I don't like Town's agency being taken away from his famed sacrifice. Still, just a theory, but whatever the last two commands actually are, we already have proof of what they're capable of doing to whoever ends up holding them. Now let's look at the most commonly discussed theory about the Dawnshards generally. This one is from Defurion, from the 17th Shards forums, but in truth, the ideology of this theory is highly discussed in the Cosmere, and most fans are happy with the core ideology behind it. But anyway, strap yourselves in and grab yourself breakfast, as it's a complicated one. If you've liked the video so far, like and subscribe for more content so that you can be here when the next video about Harmony goes live. But anyway, let's continue. "16 shards, 4 commands, and a pattern that's already come true twice. Remember that mural we spoke about in part 1? A sun explodes into 4. Each of those 4 explodes into 4 more. And remember that one-liner from 2014? One Dawnshard is different from all the rest. Here is why those two things belong in the same breath. In 2023, at a Tampa Bay comic convention, a fan asked Brandon directly about that mural, whether it meant 4 shards of similar intent could actually combine into something stable, a kind of super shard, without the disaster we saw of Sazed and Harmony. His answer, word for word, that's a correct line of theorising. A couple of years before that, someone had asked him more broadly whether it was worth thinking about the shards in pairs or groups of 4 at all. He said to that, go ahead, though he added that it's not necessarily hugely relevant to the actual narrative. Interesting that he volunteered that anyway. That's about as close to a green light as we're likely to get. The most complete and recent attempt to actually build that framework comes from a theorist called Defurion, over on the 17th Shard forum. To be clear, the broader idea that the 16 shards divide into 4 families under the 4 Dawnshards has been floating around fan spaces for years, and that 2014 line is a big part of why. Defurion's real contribution is working out which is the odd one out. His reasoning, exist behaves like a starting command, the same way awakening begins with a base word before a modifier that gets added. Change, and whatever the other 2 turn out to be, are those modifiers. Which makes exist the strongest candidate for the Dawnshard Brandon flagged as different all the way back in 2014. And here's the shape of the rest of it. Change and exist, the 2 confirmed commands, anchor 2 of those groups. For the other 2, Defurion proposes his own placeholder names, feel and act, since Sanderson has never confirmed what they actually are yet. I've put the full breakdown on screen, because reading 16 shard names out aloud isn't going to help either of us. Feel free to pause it if you want to sit with it. In each of the 4 groups, there's exactly 1 shard that's only ever been touched by that single command. I've highlighted each one of these for you. No other Dawnshards influence it. According to this theory, those 4 are Preservation for the Exist Dawnshard, Ruin for the Change Dawnshard, Odium for the Field Dawnshard, and Honour for the Act Dawnshard. Now watch what happens when you check that against what's already happened in the books. Preservation and Ruin already fused, that's Harmony. Honour and Odium already fused, that's Retribution. All of these pure shards in this entire theoretical framework are the exact 2 pairs that we've already watched merge on page. That's either an enormous coincidence, or it's a pattern the story's been running the whole time, and we've only just noticed it. And if the pattern holds, maybe what we're watching isn't 16 shards slowly working their way towards becoming 1 Adonalsium again. Maybe it's something smaller. Could we perhaps also see other similar pairings merge, such as Endowment and Cultivation, belonging to the Change and Act Dawnshards? Another strange coincidence if you watched my Valor video, where I believe these 2 are clearly in league with each other. It'll be very exciting to revisit this video as we learn more about the other shards such as Whimsy, Reason, Invention, and the rest. But a handful of the least complicated shards could slowly be finding each other, one merger at a time. Not a resurrection as put forward by many theorists, consolidation. Which brings us back to Hoid and Risen, standing at Eurythera, watching their Dawnshards try to pull them together. Hoid describes exactly what a Dawnshard feels when one gets close. He compares the pull to a way that an electron is drawn towards a nucleus. These things are built to find each other again, which means it doesn't actually matter what Hoid wants, or Risen, or the dragons who move theirs out of fear of their own kind. If the 4 things that killed a god are physically drawn back towards one another, the only open question left is whose hands they're in when the Dawnshards finally reunite. To close the video out, what gets me about the Dawnshards is how much of this is actually confirmed. Brandon's answered direct questions about these things for over a decade. The Savant comparison, the mural, and a straight yes on whether 4 shards of similar intent could combine into something more stable. For a central Cosmere mystery, that's an unusual amount of daylight. And yet, we still don't actually know for sure if Hoid has it back, as far as I can see. Also, someone we've already met on the page in a published book is living under a torment right now, and nobody has the faintest idea who it is. Do you think it's Frost like I do? And 2 of the Dawnshards we know very little about. This might be the most answered mystery in the entire Cosmere, and it's still one of the most open. What are those other 2 commands, and what happened the second all 4 of them stopped being apart? Like, subscribe, and get in the comments. Tell me exactly what you think the last 2 commands are. Advanced Cosmere Studies will be doing his own video on the Dawnshard, and his understanding of the shards and shardic intent is second to none. If you like classroom-style scientific breakdowns of Cosmere mechanics and want more info on the Dawnshards, it could be for you. I will be there in the comments. But first, I look forward to your contributions in the comments. This has been a fun one for me and quite challenging. Vote on the next topic in the community post, because if I have the question, maybe you do too. I'll see you in the next one.